The Global Child Protection Working Group, the international coordinating body for protecting girls and boys in humanitarian settings, has produced a video series on the minimum standards for child protection in humanitarian action. These minimum standards, also known as the CPMS, were developed through widespread inter-agency collaboration. They are one of the companions to the Sphere standards. This video examines how to use them. It expects that you will have already looked at them. For other installments in the series, please go to the CPWG's website. The minimum standards for child protection in humanitarian action exist to solve challenges. They are practical, inter-agency benchmarks that are relevant to all actors. This video will help you use the whole set of standards in your preparedness and response programming. At the end, we will let you know where you can find more information and resources to support your work. Under each standard, you find background information on the topic, the standard itself, key actions to take in the preparedness or response phase, outcome and action indicators to measure your efforts, notes to guide the work, and a reference list.
As an advisor, I found the key actions to be very useful, and they provide a nice overview of the different main points you should be doing in your programming on a certain area of child protection, or that you could be doing. We looked on Standard 16 through the key actions on community-based mechanisms and realized that we hadn't incorporated a component on peer-to-peer response and monitoring, which was actually something that was quite useful for the project to be added in.
There was a case in which I had to work with the Ministry of Social Affairs that was in Chad. And at that time we didn't have this child protection minimum standards. This was a situation in which I had to experience difficult work, and what we could do was only to refer to UNICEF core commitments for children. But now these days we are lucky because we have minimum standards that can help, that can guide, that can confirm that we are doing the right things, we are on good track.
The guidance notes offer helpful and practical tips for each topic. They provide questions to ask ourselves and remind us to ensure age and gender-appropriate responses.
So for example, we've used it in a workshop recently when we realized that not all the participants had the same understanding of the process of documenting unaccompanied and separated children. So we were able to go to the guidance notes in the relevant standard and then go through what exactly are the different steps.
One of the main goals of the minimum standards is to improve accountability. In order to do that, the CPMS clarify the ways that we measure the impacts of our work. They instruct us to consider both outcomes and actions and provide sample indicators and possible targets. Indicators for each standard can be directly incorporated into your project proposal and monitoring plans. First, however, adapt the targets according to the context and baseline.
So CPMS standards and indicators greatly helped our programming and then design and monitoring staff member to understand what it takes to have a quality child protection program. Often we have a strong budget constraints coming from our management side or programming side to cut back our human resource cost in the project. But with these standards indicators clearly articulating what is the minimum standard between the children and trained staff member ratio, we are able to secure the quality staff members with the capacity building budget built in our project proposals.
Donors and host governments are calling on us to demonstrate the value of what we do. Building an evidence base for child protection through assessing what works well, where and when is of growing importance.
Minimum standards for child protection emergencies can be a foundation to help us create an evidence base for child protection. And what I mean by evidence base is twofold. One is create evidence to be able to program well, which is out of an assessment. So we use indicators that are in the minimum standards to do a good enough assessment of the situation to be able to program well. Then we generate evidence out of our programs to be able to see what programs work, what programs don't work, so that others can learn from our experience to improve their practices.
The CPMS aim to strengthen all stages of humanitarian work and so should be used in preparedness, response and early recovery efforts with prevention woven throughout. When an emergency happens unexpectedly, you will need to look back at the preparedness actions to see what to consider.
I particularly appreciate these minimum standards starts with the action for preparedness. Over that time, we learned good emergency response are coming from good developmental program. This also relates with the principle number 5, which we talked about child protection system strengthening.
In preparing for a new site camp in Jordan to observe the refugee influx, we have used the child protection minimum standard to assess the new site. The recommendation of that assessment was communicated to the protection sector to be incorporated into the camp setting up plan.
So if you look at the key action section of the minimum standards, we'll see that it's divided into preparedness and response. And within each of those, we have prevention-related activities that are mentioned in the key actions. So within preparedness, you might do things that would ultimately prevent a separation or engagement of a child in child labor should an emergency happen. Within response segment, you also have activities that are to prevent a future harm to a child.
Agencies integrate the standards and use them as a guiding tool. They complement existing strategies and policies. As we have seen, they can be used for programming on a range of issues. They can also be used for gathering and managing information, hiring staff, advocating for support from senior management, interacting with the media, or writing grant applications.
So since the introduction of child protection minimum standards in our way of working in Burkina Faso, now key actors, implementing partners, can no longer do without them. So they have to introduce them in their planning. They'll have every time to show that they have at least integrated 1, 2, 3 minimum standards to make sure that everything is being conducted in a right way.
Coordination is central to the CPMS. Using the same standards and indicators within and between individual agencies allows for greater harmonization. It also enables more reliable and efficient data collection. There is much greater potential for an effective collective response when different actors in the same context all use the CPMS to guide their work.
For many staff members coming from development program, the intense interagency coordination in emergency actions are somewhat new for them. But these standards really emphasize for better child protection practices, we need to coordinate and making sure that we are using the common forms and also taking joint actions and making mutual referral pathways.
In addition to child protection actors, it is essential that our colleagues working in nutrition, education, camp management and others join with us to apply the relevant minimum standards for child protection. This approach ensures that girls and boys are not harmed or put at risk by any humanitarian action.
Previously, children were supported through one type of service, for example, the health services or security services. But the foundation of the minimum standards is based on the partnership approach in service provisions among different institutions.
Sector staff members often would keen to know what exactly they can do tomorrow to mainstream child protection in their action, rather than the principle level that is still vague for them. Child protection minimum standards really give them a key action points that they can implement in their sector immediately. And In addition, the child protection minimum standards also give opportunity for child protection staff members to think about what they can do to mainstream and understand how other sector team operates. So this gonna enhance child protection staff members' understanding about other sector programs and identify key opportunities and moments we can work together.
We expect that the minimum standards will guide humanitarian organizations in their efforts to better protect children. Moving forward, we will be encouraging all of our partners to adopt the child protection minimum standards and take active steps to ensure that they're implementing them in their programming.
The standards are applicable in all situations. However, to make them more relevant and effective in a specific response, it is important to adapt or contextualize them. This involves a process carried out through the local coordination mechanism. The government usually co-leads it in order to ensure that all relevant national policies and standards are considered.
Before preparing the international standards, Jordan, led by the Council, started developing standards for family protection. Hence, when the CPMS was finalized, our aim was to harmonize between the standards developed by the global CPWG and those developed by the Council to come up with a unified set of standards to avoid any confusion among service providers.
Contextualization is not about changing the words of the standards themselves, but prioritizing them, clarifying the guidance, agreeing on key actions, and setting common indicators. The end result is that all actors have the same understanding of how each relevant standard should be met locally.
They're flexible, they can be adapted to your context, make it work for you.
Contextualization can be undertaken as a preparedness or response measure. Check with UNICEF, UNHCR for refugee situations, or the relevant government ministry to see if it has been done in your location. So to summarize, child protection workers use the CPMS because they provide key actions, guidance notes, and indicators to use in preparedness and response to emergencies, are used by all types of actors working on a single or interagency basis, promote the mainstreaming of child protection into all humanitarian preparedness and response efforts, and finally, when adapted to a specific context, allow actors to have a common understanding. Each of us taking up the challenge to apply the minimum standards for child protection in humanitarian action will improve protection results for children. This video on using the CPMS is to help you use and communicate on the standards. The rest of the series focuses on specific standards for addressing child protection needs and developing adequate child protection strategies. The CPWG also provides support for integrating and applying the standards within your agency, including checklists for integrating them into your workplace, guidance on how agencies can adapt them to the context, child and youth-friendly versions of the text, training packages on child protection in emergencies as a whole, as well as specialized packages. The CPWG may also be able to provide technical support and in-country resource persons. For more information and contact details, please go to cpwg.net/minimum-standards.